He was the kind of man who owned the city of Chicago in tailored suits. I was just Clara, the quiet, overweight bookkeeper in apartment 4B. But at 2 a.m., he didn't go to his penthouse. Bleeding, reeking of bourbon, the deadliest man in Chicago collapsed against my door. I have never been the girl who gets the guy. I've always been the girl who balances the books, bakes the apology cupcakes, and blends into the beige wallpaper of my corporate office. At 29, I'm a solid size 22. I have thick thighs that chafe in the summer, a soft belly I spend entirely too much time trying to hide under empire waist dresses, and a face people politely call sweet. Men don't cross crowded rooms for me. They certainly don't bleed out on my doorstep. It was a Tuesday night in late November. The Chicago wind was howling off Lake Michigan, rattling the single-pane windows of my Logan Square apartment. I was sitting on my worn-out velvet sofa in oversized flannel pajamas, eating a bowl of cold mac and cheese, reviewing some incredibly messy ledgers for my firm, Miller & Hayes Accounting. Then the knocking started. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a frantic, heavy thudding, accompanied by a low, guttural groan that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I froze, my spoon halfway to my mouth. I checked the peephole. My breath caught in my throat. It was Gabriel Rossi. Everyone in the city knew who Gabriel Rossi was, even if they pretended they didn't. He was the heir to the Rossi Syndicate, a man whose legitimate front real estate and shipping barely masked the ruthless, violent empire he ran beneath it. I only knew him because he owned the building I lived in. And once, 6 months earlier, he'd held the elevator doors open for me when I was dropping 2 bags of groceries. He'd looked at me, then really looked at me, his dark eyes trailing over my curves in a way that made my skin flush, before I quickly looked away, certain he was mocking me. Now he was slumped against my doorframe, the left side of his expensive charcoal overcoat soaked in something dark and wet. I undid the deadbolt before my brain could scream at me to stop. The moment the door opened, his massive frame pitched forward. I caught him out of pure reflex, his weight crushing me against the hallway wall. He smelled like expensive cologne, copper, and a heavy, intoxicating wave of Kentucky bourbon. "Close it," he rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper against my ear. I kicked the door shut and locked it. "Mr. Rossi, you're bleeding. I need to call 911. His large, calloused hand clamped over my wrist. Even injured and drunk, his grip was like a steel vise. "No cops. No hospitals. Just you and me." My voice squeaked. "I'm an accountant. I don't know how to fix a bullet hole." "You're Clara," he muttered, his eyes fluttering as he leaned his forehead against my shoulder. The heat radiating off him was immense. "I need you, Clara." My heart hammered against my ribs. How did he know my name? I didn't have time to ask. He was slipping into unconsciousness. Gritting my teeth, I threw his good arm over my shoulders. Despite my insecurities about my weight, I am strong. I hauled his 6'2", pure muscle body across my small living room, steering him toward the bathroom. We collapsed onto the hexagonal tiles. Okay, I breathed, my hands shaking as I peeled his ruined coat off. His white dress shirt was glued to his skin with blood. "I'm going to have to cut this." "Do it," he ground out, leaning his head against the porcelain rim of the bathtub. I grabbed my fabric shears from the vanity and cut the shirt away. The gunshot wound was high on his left shoulder, a through and through, thankfully. But it was bleeding heavily. For the next hour, I became a machine. I cleaned the wound with rubbing alcohol, ignoring his sharp hisses of pain, and packed it with sterile gauze from my overly prepared first aid kit. Every time my hands brushed against his heavily tattooed, heavily scarred chest, my pulse spiked. He was a masterpiece of hard lines and violent history. I was a collection of soft curves and quiet evenings. We didn't belong in the same universe, let alone the same bathroom. As I taped the last piece of gauze down, I realized he was staring at me. The glassy, drunken haze in his dark eyes had sharpened into something intensely focused. "Why didn't you scream?" he asked, his voice thick. I'm too tired to scream on a Tuesday, I said, trying to joke to cover my raging nerves. I sat back on my heels, wrapping my arms around my waist, suddenly hyper-aware of how deeply unflattering my flannel pajamas were. Why did you come here, Gabriel? You have a penthouse. You have men. You have money. He reached out, his knuckles brushing against my knee. The contact sent a jolt of electricity straight through me. They were waiting for me at the penthouse, he said, his words slightly slurred but deadly serious. And my men are the ones who shot me. A cold dread pooled in my stomach. What? My underboss. Vincent. He bought out half my crew. I barely made it out. Gabriel's hand slid up to my thigh, his thumb resting casually on the soft, thick flesh there. He didn't pull away like it disgusted him. His grip was grounding, almost possessive. I couldn't go to any of my safe houses. Vincent knows them all. So you came to a random tenant's apartment? I asked, my voice trembling. You're not random, Clara, he whispered, his eyes heavy as the alcohol and blood loss finally dragged him under. I've been watching you for a long time. His eyes rolled back, and he passed out on my bathroom floor. I sat there, in the silence of my apartment, my hands covered in a mafia boss's blood, staring at the man who had just blown my invisible, quiet life entirely to pieces. The smell of freshly brewed coffee woke me. For a terrifying second, my brain didn't process the anomaly. Then my eyes snapped open. I was lying in my own bed, tangled in my duvet. The last thing I remembered was dragging Gabriel's unconscious body onto my living room rug and throwing a blanket over him, because I couldn't lift him onto the sofa. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my oversized cardigan, wrapping it tightly around my body like armor. I practically tiptoed into the kitchen. Gabriel Rossi was standing at my counter. He was shirtless, the stark white bandages I'd applied standing out against his tanned, tattooed skin. He'd found the spare sweatpants I kept for my brother, and though they were a bit tight on him, he looked devastatingly domestic. He was holding my favorite pink mug, the one that said, "Accountants do it with balance." "You're awake," he said smoothly. The drunkenness from last night was completely gone. In its place was a lethal, quiet predator. "You're making coffee," I replied, my brain short-circuiting. "You got shot last night. You should be resting. I heal fast." He poured a second cup and slid it across the island toward me. "Black, 2 sugars." "Right." I froze, my hand hovering over the ceramic. "How do you know how I take my coffee?" Gabriel leaned against the counter, his dark, calculating eyes locking onto mine. In the daylight, the harsh reality of who we were hit me harder. He was a kingpin, a man who commanded fear. I was a civilian woman who panicked when the barista got my order wrong. "I know a lot about you, Clara Higgins," he said softly. "I know you work for Miller and Hayes. I know you stay late on Thursdays. I know you hate the gym, but love walking through Millennium Park. And I know that 3 days ago, you flagged a massive discrepancy in the accounts of a shell corporation called Apex Holdings." The air in my lungs vanished. Apex Holdings. It was a massive account I'd been auditing. I had found nearly $4 million missing, siphoned off into offshore accounts. I'd reported it to my boss, Mr. Miller, just the day before. "Apex Holdings is yours," I whispered, the puzzle pieces clicking together with terrifying speed. "It's a front for the Rossi family." "Yes," Gabriel confirmed, taking a sip of his coffee. "But I wasn't the one stealing the money. Vincent was. He's been bleeding my accounts dry to fund a coup against me." I backed up until my hips hit the refrigerator. "Oh my God. I'm going to go to jail. Or I'm going to be murdered." "Neither." Gabriel set his mug down and closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. I instinctively shrank back, hyper-aware of my size, of how much space I took up in this tiny kitchen. But he didn't let me retreat. He placed a hand on the fridge beside my head, boxing me in. Miller told Vincent that a smart little accountant found the leak. Vincent ordered a hit on you last night. Tears pricked my eyes. What? I intercepted the call. Gabriel's voice dropped an octave, rough and urgent. I went to your office to get you, but you were already gone. Vincent's men ambushed me in the parking garage. That's how I got this. He gestured to his bandaged shoulder. I managed to lose them, but I couldn't go back to my territory. I had to get to you before they did. You came here to save me. A tear spilled over my cheek. Why? Why do you care about a random bookkeeper? Gabriel reached out, his thumb gently wiping the tear away. His gaze dropped to my lips, then trailed down my neck, lingering on the fullness of my chest and the curve of my hips hidden beneath the chunky cardigan. There was no disgust in his eyes. There was hunger. I told you last night, you're not random to me, he murmured. 6 months ago, I watched you drop your groceries in the lobby. You were so flustered. You swore at a rolling lemon, and you had a smear of flour on your cheek. You were so real. In my world, Clara, everything is plastic and blood. You are soft. You are beautiful. I started keeping tabs on you, to make sure you were safe. When I heard Vincent put a target on your back, I nearly tore the city apart. I was trembling. Gabriel, look at me. Look at my body. I'm not a mobster's girlfriend. I'm a size 22. I like baking sourdough and reading romance novels. I don't fit in your world. I don't want you to fit in my world, he said fiercely, his hand sliding to my waist, pulling my soft body flush against his hard one. I want you exactly as you are. Plump, sweet, and mine. Before I could process the words, his lips crashed down on mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, bruising, tasting of coffee and danger. For a split second, my insecurities screamed at me to push him away, to hide my stomach, to shrink myself. But the way his large hands gripped my hips, kneading my curves like they were exactly what his hands were made to hold, silenced the voices in my head. I melted into him, my fingers tangling in his dark hair. Crash. The sound of my front door splintering inward shattered the moment. Gabriel tore away from me, his romantic demeanor instantly replaced by cold, calculating violence. He shoved me behind his broad back, reaching into the waistband of his sweatpants to pull a sleek black Glock I hadn't realized he was carrying. They found us, Gabriel hissed, his eyes locked on the hallway. Heavy boots were pounding toward the kitchen. How? I panicked, grabbing a cast-iron skillet from the stove because it was the only weapon I had. Miller must have given them your address, Gabriel said, his body tensing like a coiled spring. He glanced over his shoulder at me. There's a fire escape out your bedroom window. When I start shooting, you run, Clara. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you, I yelled. You are if you want to live, he roared, just as the first man in a tactical jacket rounded the corner into my kitchen. Gunfire erupted, deafening and bright in the tight space. Gabriel fired twice, dropping the first man, but 2 more were right behind him. The air filled with smoke and the shattering of ceramic as my plates exploded. Gabriel grabbed my arm, practically throwing me toward the bedroom. Move, Clara. Now. I ran. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from judgment, or diets, or the mirror. I was running for my life, with the deadliest man in Chicago fighting to keep me breathing. The winter air hit me like a physical blow as I shoved the bedroom window open and scrambled onto the rusted iron fire escape. Behind me, the deafening cracks of gunfire echoed through my small apartment, followed by the terrifying sound of bodies hitting the floor. I didn't have a coat. I was still wearing my oversized flannel pajama pants and my chunky knit cardigan, my bare feet slipping on the icy metal grating. I scrambled down the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs would splinter. Below, the dark, snow-dusted alley off Logan Boulevard was quiet, completely indifferent to the war happening in Unit 4B. I hit the asphalt just as a heavy weight landed beside me. I shrieked, but a large hand clamped over my mouth. "It's me," Gabriel grunted. His face was pale, his jaw set in a hard, violent line. The white bandages I'd applied were blooming with fresh, bright red blood, but his grip was as strong as ever. "Move. Now." He dragged me down the alley, throwing us behind a row of dumpsters just as my bedroom window shattered above us. Bullets chewed into the brick wall where we'd been standing seconds before. Gabriel pulled a set of keys from his pocket and hit a button. A nondescript black sedan parked illegally by the curb flashed its lights. "Get in the floorboard of the back seat," he ordered, shoving me toward the door. I didn't argue. I threw my body into the back, curling into a tight ball on the floor mats. Gabriel slid into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life before the door even closed. We tore out of the alley, tires screaming against the frozen pavement. I lay there in the dark, sobbing quietly, my thighs pressed against my chest. My life was over. My apartment was a war zone. I was going to die because I was good at math. "Breathe, Clara." Gabriel's voice floated back to me, surprisingly calm amid the chaos. "They aren't following us. We're clear." We drove in silence for nearly an hour. When the car finally slowed, I peeked over the seat. We were pulling into the attached garage of a modern, secluded home in Oak Park, a quiet suburb miles from the city's underbelly. The garage door closed behind us, sealing us into pitch blackness until Gabriel turned on the overhead lights. He practically fell out of the car, his hand clutching his bleeding shoulder. My panic over my own situation vanished, replaced by the terrifying realization that my mafia boss was bleeding out again. I scrambled out and helped him into the house. It was a safe house, minimalist, sterile, fully equipped for disasters. I guided him to a leather sofa in the living room and immediately started searching the pristine cabinets for medical supplies. By the time I'd restitched the tear in his wound and bandaged him back up, my hands were coated in his blood again. I sat back on my heels, the adrenaline fading, leaving me exhausted and utterly broken. I looked down at my body, my stomach rolling over the waistband of my pajamas, my arms trembling. I felt so incredibly out of place. Gabriel reached out with his uninjured arm, wrapping it around my waist, pulling me up onto the sofa beside him. He didn't just sit me next to him. He pulled me directly onto his lap. I gasped, stiffening, hyper-aware of my weight pressing down on him. "Gabriel, stop. I'm too heavy." "If you say that again, I'm going to kiss you until you forget the word," he growled, his dark eyes flashing with a fierce, possessive heat. He wrapped both arms around my waist, burying his face in the crook of my neck. "You feel like home, Clara. You feel safe. Stop apologizing for taking up space in a world that owes you everything." Tears spilled down my cheeks. For 29 years, I had been told to shrink, to diet, to hide, to be less. And here was the most dangerous, powerful man in Chicago, treating my soft, plus-size body like it was something to be worshipped. His large hands roamed over the curve of my hips, squeezing the plush flesh of my thighs with unabashed reverence. "They frame me," I whispered into his hair, the reality of the morning setting in. Gabriel pulled back, his expression turning lethal. He reached into his pocket and pulled up a local news stream on his phone. The headline made my stomach violently drop. Local accountant Clara Higgins sought in $4 million embezzlement scheme. Police suspect ties to organized crime. On the screen, Detective Jack Sullivan, a notoriously dirty cop I'd read about in the papers, stood at a podium. Next to him, looking deeply solemn and fake, was my boss, Richard Miller. Miller, Gabriel spat the name like poison. "He's been washing Vincent's stolen money." When you found the leak, they realized they needed a fall guy. They set you up to take the charge, and sent Vincent's men to kill you, so you could never testify. "I'm a fugitive," I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. "I'm a boring accountant, and I'm on the FBI's most wanted list." "You're not going down for this," Gabriel said, grabbing my chin and forcing me to look at him. The sheer authority in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. "You are mine, Clara. And nobody touches what's mine. We are going to destroy them." How? I cried. We're hiding in the suburbs. I watched his mind work, the ruthless mafia kingpin calculating his next move. Then an idea sparked in my own brain. The one thing I knew better than Gabriel Rossi was numbers. Wait, I said, wiping my eyes and sitting up. Miller thinks I'm just a dumb girl with a calculator. But when I found the apex discrepancy, I backed up the entire firm's encrypted ledger onto a hidden cloud server. He doesn't know I have it. Gabriel's eyes widened, a slow, wicked smile spreading across his handsome face. You stole the ledger. I secured it. For auditing purposes, I corrected, a tiny surge of confidence blooming in my chest. If I can get a laptop, I can trace the IP addresses of the shell companies back to Miller's personal accounts. I can prove he and Vincent orchestrated the theft. Gabriel pulled me down by the back of my neck and kissed me hard, devouring my mouth with a hunger that made my toes curl. Have I mentioned I am completely obsessed with your brain, too? The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine, code, and stolen kisses. Gabriel had one of his loyal men, a towering, terrifying Irishman named Liam Donovan, smuggle a high-grade laptop and encrypted hard drives to the safe house. While Gabriel spent the days on burner phones rallying the capos who hadn't betrayed him, I sat at the kitchen island, fingers flying across the keyboard. I felt completely different. I wasn't the timid girl hiding her stomach under baggy clothes anymore. I was Gabriel's equal. Every time I cracked a new layer of Miller's firewall, Gabriel would walk up behind me, press his chest against my back, and kiss the side of my neck, whispering filthy, encouraging praises into my ear. By Thursday night, I had it. Got him, I breathed, staring at the screen. Miller funneled the $4 million through 3 offshore accounts directly into a trust owned by Vincent's wife. And I have the digital signatures to prove it. Gabriel leaned over my shoulder, his eyes scanning the data. You are magnificent, Clara. He turned to Liam, who was cleaning a custom assault rifle at the dining table. Call the men. Tell them we know where Vincent is tonight. He's at the shipping yard on the Calumet River, Liam grunted, slapping a magazine into the weapon. Meeting with Miller to finalize the takeover. Good, Gabriel said smoothly, adjusting the cuffs of the fresh black suit Liam had brought him. He looked like the devil himself, elegant, terrifying, and undeniably gorgeous. He turned to me, his expression softening. Send the files to Detective Sullivan's captain. The feds too. Clear your name. I'll take care of the rest. I'm coming with you, I said, standing up. Gabriel frowned. Clara, no. It's going to be a bloodbath. I don't care, I said, my voice steady. I crossed the room and placed my hands flat against his hard chest. They ruined my apartment. They ruined my life. They made me feel like I was nothing. I want to watch them lose. Gabriel stared at me for a long moment, a dark, primal pride swelling in his eyes. He wrapped his hand around the back of my neck. Okay. But you stay behind Liam. Understood? An hour later, we were standing in the freezing rain outside Warehouse 4 at the Calumet shipping yards. Gabriel had amassed 20 of his most lethal enforcers. They moved like shadows, slipping through the side doors. Liam stayed right in front of me, a human shield. Inside the massive, echoing warehouse, Vincent and Richard Miller were standing over a table covered in blueprints and cash. It's done, Vincent was saying, a smug grin on his face. Gabriel is dead, the girl is taking the fall, and the city is ours. Not quite, a voice boomed through the warehouse. Gabriel stepped out of the shadows, his gun raised. The sheer terror that washed over Vincent and Miller's faces was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. Vincent's men immediately drew their weapons, but Gabriel's loyalists stepped out along the catwalks above, laser sights painting a dozen red dots across Vincent's crew. Drop them, Gabriel commanded. The authority in his voice left no room for debate. One by one, Vincent's men lowered their guns. They knew a losing battle when they saw one. Gabriel, Vincent stammered, holding his hands up. We can talk about this. We're family. You shot me in the back, Gabriel said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he closed the distance. But worse than that, you put a hit on my woman. Miller, my slimy, cowardly boss, fell to his knees. I didn't know. Vincent made me do it. Clara, tell him. He looked past Gabriel, finally spotting me standing by the door. I stepped out from behind Liam. I didn't try to make myself look smaller. I stood tall, letting my curves fill my coat, letting them see the woman who had just dismantled their entire empire from a kitchen counter. I sent the files to the FBI 20 minutes ago, Mr. Miller, I said, my voice echoing in the silent warehouse. Your accounts are frozen. The warrants have been issued. You're going to federal prison for a very, very long time. Miller began to sob. Sirens started wailing in the distance, growing louder by the second. Gabriel didn't look at the police approaching. He kept his gun leveled at Vincent. The cops can have the accountant, Gabriel whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. But they don't get the traitor. 2 shots rang out. Vincent crumpled to the floor. Gabriel turned his back on the body, walking calmly toward me as the warehouse doors burst open and SWAT teams flooded the building. He grabbed my waist, pulling me flush against him as chaos erupted. Liam and the men faded into the shadows, escaping before the cops could fully secure the perimeter, but Gabriel stayed right beside me. They're going to arrest you, I panicked, as the cops swarmed Miller. They have nothing on me. I'm just a legitimate businessman checking on my property. Gabriel smirked, his thumb tracing my lower lip. And you're my brilliant, beautiful savior. 6 months later, I wasn't living in Unit 4B anymore. I was standing on the balcony of Gabriel's massive downtown penthouse, wearing a custom silk robe that draped perfectly over my thighs and soft belly. I held a glass of expensive champagne, looking out over the glittering Chicago skyline. Richard Miller was serving 20 years in federal prison. My name had been completely cleared, and with the massive settlement I'd received from the firm for wrongful termination and endangerment, I had started my own private consulting business. My only client was the Rossi legitimate empire. A pair of strong, heavily tattooed arms wrapped around my waist from behind. Gabriel pressed his chest against my back, burying his face in my neck. Working late, Madam Consultant, he murmured, his hands immediately finding the soft curve of my stomach, rubbing it affectionately. Just making sure your real estate taxes are legal, mister. Rossi, I teased, leaning back into his solid warmth. I don't care about the taxes, he whispered, turning me around so I was flush against him. He looked down at me, his dark eyes filled with that same absolute obsession he'd shown me on our first night. I only care about you, my beautiful, perfect girl. He kissed me, slow and deep, under the city lights. I wasn't just the quiet, overweight girl in the background anymore. I was the queen of Chicago's underworld, loved, fiercely protected, endlessly wanted, and finally taking up exactly the right amount of space. If you loved Gabriel and Clara's intense, high-stakes mafia romance, drop a like on this video. Share it with friends who love a curvy heroine getting her happily ever after, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling romance stories. See you next time.